that would show how to break it. Now, so if copy protection can tolerate and occasionally break and mend it, it will not prevent the sort of attack Niels has made, which involves finding the master key of the system, being able to create new devices, and basically wipe out the entire system. Yes, it might prevent small-scale attacks, but not attacks based on a deep understanding of the system. It's very interesting because the people who are pushing this copy prevention technology ultimately, I think, are stupid. Right? Well, they're cartels. They're small groups of companies that dominate an industry, say making movies or distributing music. And what they want is that no matter how the technology changes, their fundamental business model should continue the same. Well, if you have a fundamental technological change, let's say the price of copying a song or a movie changes by a factor of 10, and then 5 or 6 or 8 years later it changes by another factor of 10. This is going to make big changes in the business models that will work or fail. They don't want to change their business models. So this is their attempt to plug the dike and hope that somehow they can keep those business models working. But it's a stupid attempt because it's bound to fail. Right? It can't work in the long run. Not only can it not work in the long run, but by suppressing the kind of research that creates copy protection systems, that understands how they work, how to make them weak, how to make them strong, they're actually undermining the technology that they're trying to use against us. But they don't seem to have noticed this yet. This is why I say they're stupid. So let's look at the basic copy prevention system. The idea is some third party decides that they want to provide you some information and deny you the ability, somehow provide you the ability to look at it or to listen to it, but not provide you the ability to make any copies of it. Well, you already have a pretty fundamental conflict there. I mean, you can remember it, right? You can show it to other people. If the information comes out of the system and into sound and into light, it can be recaptured by other means. I think it's really funny that the book publishing industry is so worried about the security of ebooks that Adobe is encouraging companies to, encouraging the US government to imprison people for showing how trivial their security features were. When, if you really wanted to copy a book, the obvious thing to do is go buy the physical book, run it through a scanner, run it through OCR, and post it on the net. It might be simpler than decoding, than defeating the copy protection system if you could buy it as an ebook. So, one of the issues here is that copy prevention will only work if consumers have no alternative to it. Right? If you have a choice between buying, let's say, a DVD recorder that'll let you record any program you want, anything from your camera, pull things down over the net and record them on DVDs, or one that will only let you record certain programs at certain times if you charge to a credit card and if you plug it in the right way, which one would you choose? Right, the most free one. Well, so the whole theory of copy prevention is to prevent those free copiers from coming into the market. That is, to prevent competition that would give the consumer what the consumer wants. It's a tool for monopolies. to retain their monopoly, to prevent startups from giving the consumer a better deal than what the monopoly wants to give the consumer. There's another interesting aspect of this, which is because consumers understand that they don't want to buy a technology that will refuse to do what they ask it to do, that when you press record it will say, no, I don't like what you're recording. They don't advertise these products as being copy protected. So the result is they basically lie to their consumers. They say, look, Apple has this great DVD recorder. They put up big billboards that say, Apple, rip, mix, burn. But they don't say, our DVD recorder won't let you rip or mix or burn from your DVDs. Right? They leave the implication that it can, but in fact it doesn't. So it encourages deceit among manufacturers and encourages mistrust among consumers, and that's not a good thing. Another piece of this puzzle is that the companies who seek to impose copy prevention technology on the market are trying to impose a social policy on the whole society. And they're doing this all in back rooms where only the people they want are invited and without input from the public. Here's an example of the Secure Digital Music Initiative, which is the record company's attempt to make a standard for secure, supposedly secured against us, digital music. They announced that they're forming this initiative, that the record companies are participating, a bunch of consumer electronics and computer companies are participating. Well, EFF went down there and said, hey, we'd like to participate too. Can we come in, talk to people about this? And they said, oh, I'm sorry. Even though you offered to pay the fee that we charge everybody else, we don't see that you have a valid interest in the copy protection issue, so we want to exclude you from the discussion. Another angle about this imposing a social policy without public input is easiest to see, I think, in the BCSS case. For DVD players, the CSS protection scheme was invented, was created, well, first consumer electronics manufacturers figured out how to make DVD players and how to make machines that would press the discs. And they went to the movie companies and said, you can distribute movies on this. And the movie companies said, well, we refuse to do that until you put in some kind of protection scheme. And they went off into back rooms and they came up with this protection scheme. It turns out that it's a trade secret that was created by Toshiba and Matsushita. Now, a trade secret is a form of intellectual property that essentially exists by you not telling anybody what the secret is. Right? If you created the secret and you tell somebody, if you tell the public, then it's not a secret anymore and you get no protection. The only kind of protection you get is if you make everybody who receives it sign a contract that says they promise not to tell anybody. Well, so using this trade secret, they made the DVD player manufacturers all sign licenses. And these licenses were private between, say, the DVD CCA, I forget what that stands for, Copy Control Association, and the player manufacturers. So the public never got to see these licenses until all the court cases were filed, and eventually they had to file sample copies of them. We're still trying to get the actual copies that were signed by the relevant parties involved. But the sample copies are like 70-page documents that lay out all the things that you're not allowed to build into a DVD player if they're going to give you this license. Things like you can't have a digital output. You can't, you have to put macrovision on all the analog outputs of the player. You can't put in, you have to impose the region code controls. These are all terms that are being imposed on the DVD market, being imposed on every manufacturer of DVD players and on all the consumers without any public input. Well, there's a way around this, and it comes from many years of law about competition. If you can buy somebody else's product and take it apart and see how it works and make something compatible with it, then you're free to do that and compete. And if there were any trade secrets in there, if you figure them out by looking at the product, then they're not secret anymore. Well, John Johansson and other unnamed parties looked at one of these DVD players and extracted its secrets and made a competing product. And that competing product didn't comply with the license, but they'd never even seen the license and they never agreed to the license. And ultimately, people who republished his software were held to be breaking the law because they didn't sign that license and comply with it. Well, in what way can they be forced to sign an arbitrary license created by two third parties who they've never met? Somehow they're being held to the terms of that license that they never had access to see. And somehow all of us who buy DVD players are being held to the terms of a license that we can never see. And the law, the DMCA, is being used to impose those terms on us. So we have no control over those terms, no input into whether they're any good, and no recourse if we don't like it. Question?
Yeah, comment. Actually, it's even worse than that, because we're not held to the license. The license is between the player manufacturer and DVD CCA. However, the license has certain restrictions and features on the player, and we're not even allowed to reverse engineer the player to find out what they are. So not only are we're not exactly held to the license, but the license is enforced on us, and we are even we're criminals. We try to find out what exactly it does, what exactly the terms of the license are.
Yeah, let's say the license is not enforced against us, but if we don't follow it, then we're sued or imprisoned.
Right. Yeah, and you're disallowed. Basically, it's a law that's forced on you without any democracy in it, and you're not even allowed to find out what the law is.
Whoa, be careful here. Democracies can go off the deep end. Okay, look at the USSA.
Right. Okay. Forget the democracy part. The part is that you are held to something that you're not allowed to know.
Well, the interesting part here is the copyright law, as created over the centuries, contains a balance between the rights of the public and the rights of the creators and the rights of the publishers and all the intermediaries, the libraries, and all the other people. And that balance is worked out in legislatures and evolved through courts and occurs over many, many years. That publisher doesn't get every right to control everything you can do with that product. They get the right to control whether you can make and sell commercial copies of it. The DMCA changes that balance by basically saying whatever the publisher can agree to in a private contract is the terms that are going to be imposed on the public. That is, it doesn't have to be balanced, it doesn't have to pass the legislature, it doesn't have to be ratified by courts. If they can find a manufacturer who sign up for it, then you can be held to violate the terms if you compete with that manufacturer and try to build something better than that. Well, all of these are terrible things. But I think there's a far worse issue happening here. And this relates to the future evolution of technology. I don't know if you folks have noticed, but computer technology, networking technology, and related fields, including material science and other forms of biological science, etc., have been on this increasing curve of exponential growth, where what you would, used to be, it was a big deal if you had 1K of core memory, and then well, yeah, within a few years you could get 4K for the same price, and then it was 16K, and then it was 64, and that 64K Apple II, that was an amazing machine, right? Everyone knows nobody needs more than 640K in a computer, right? And now modern computers, you know, if there's not enough room to plug in a gigabyte, people get upset. And next year, it'll be 4 gigabytes, and 3 years out, it'll be 16 gigabytes. This is what mathematicians call an exponentially increasing trend. And humans don't have much experience with following exponential trends because you don't tend to see them very much in nature. Plagues? Well,
if you see them
some plagues take off exponentially, but they pretty rapidly exhaust the population and then they stop. I mean, well, so far there is no sign that memory technology is, I mean, it's notoriously hard to predict anything more than about 5 years out. Even the senior people at the top companies have trouble predicting. But all of the device physicists that I've listened to, all of the papers that I've read about this, basically say every time we thought there was a barrier 2 or 3 generations out, well, we go a generation or a generation and a half and we find ways to get past what used to be the barrier. Right? In chip fabrication, it used to be done with visible light. Now they're using ultraviolet. When they get past ultraviolet, they already have people using X-rays in experimental mode. And they're doing funny things with diffraction gratings to reduce the width of the lines they can draw, even using the current wavelengths of light. The same sort of, so we have this exponential trend. The main exponential trend that people see in life is gravity, right? If I take this, drop it, it accelerated exponentially, but it only did it for a couple seconds and it ran into something and quit. Well, the computer industry has been doing that for about 35 years, and it shows no sign of stopping. And the thing is, every time it doubles, it's doubling a huge number. The same thing's happening with communication capability, both bandwidth and the number of nodes you can connect to. The result is that people are much more productive than they were. We can automate far more things. We can communicate with a larger number of people and on a much broader array of topics than we could when we were scratching out letters and putting them in the post. And we're publishing papers that took 2 years to get into an academic journal. The result is that scientific advances have sped up, and in particular, there are several different paths on which we could actually come up with ways to build structures at the atomic level, rather than, right now, semiconductor fabrication, as precise as it is done in a very gross way, right? You have a big thing about that big, and you're exposing it to gases, and you're shining lights on it, and doing things like that. You're not touching atoms at an individual level, the way, say, cells in your body are picking out compounds out of the bloodstream and moving them across a cell wall and pushing them into the interior and using them, burning them for energy or whatever. But we're coming to understand how those mechanisms work at the atomic level and how to connect powerful computers with lots of memory to things that can manipulate atoms at the atomic level and how to build increasingly smaller computers, increasingly smaller and more powerful communications means. I mean, this isn't news, but Richard Feynman wrote about this in the 1950s in an article called "There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom," on how small could we build devices. And he argued, and I would argue, that there's no fundamental limit that says we can't build devices out of individual atoms. We can't design a structure to say, I want carbon here, oxygen, iron over there, and build machines that will put those atoms in the right places and do it in a way that we can build up large structures. Well, the result of doing that means that we can build much more powerful, much stronger, much stiffer building materials. We can build much more intelligent building materials that can have processors embedded in them that are measuring the strain and adjusting. In a sense, what I'm saying is that the same mechanisms, the same physical mechanisms used by living things, we can start designing into human design structures. And now, whether this ultimately means we can create life or not, is a question for the philosophers. But I'm trying to come at this from a technologist. The capability of building things and of analyzing a structure atom by atom and turning that into bits that say which atom it was and where it was in the structure, and the capability of taking such a blueprint and building it up into another structure gives us basically the capability to copy material objects. The same way that today we copy pieces of software, or we copy songs, or we copy documents. And if the exponential trends we're seeing actually pan out, the price of copying those physical objects will become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Well, this is a wonderful thing, because it finally means that we can accomplish one of the age-old dreams of humanity, which is to have plenty for everybody, to end scarcity of physical objects, to make it such that no one has to want for food or heat or shelter or anything like that, because it's cheap enough to replicate it. But there's a problem. A large fraction of our economy depends on the scarcity of physical goods. Right? People who make the chairs you're sitting in don't want there to be a competitor that can just disassemble one of their chairs and then make 10 more out of atoms for 10 cents a piece. Because they want to charge you $40 for that chair. Well, this is exactly the situation that the music companies are in, that the movie companies are in. Somebody has come along with a duplicator for their hard-to-build product. It may take $50 million to make a movie, but then afterward it only takes less than $1 to make a copy of it. Their business approach to that has been to outlaw copiers. To make anyone who provides the public with the capability of making a copy of their movie brand them criminal and drive them out of society. Well, that same technology is the technology that would end scarcity and bring plenty to all mankind. So why are we taking people who create these sort of technologies and driving them out of society? Well, it's because, I guess there are two reasons as I see it. One is greed, and the other is short-sightedness. The people who run these companies can't see any further than the end of their noses. They think that what worked last year is what ought to work next year, and they think if they buy enough congressmen, they can keep it that way. And the short-sightedness is they don't even understand what they're doing to their own children, what they're doing to their own grandchildren, what they're doing to their own society. They seem not to care what happens to the world after they're dead. But I care. And I hope some of you care. And so what we have to do is to understand how to build economic models, how to build business models that will pay people for the hard act of creating something new without preventing people from copying it once it's been created. Now, it's an interesting concept. Most people haven't separated those two things, so let me try going over this again. For example, a piece of software is hard to create. It may take years of a skilled person's time to put it together and to get it all working. But after it's been created, after that work has gone in, the way to get maximum benefit for society out of it is to let anybody have it who wants it. Right? Assuming that you had enough social incentives that it got built in the first place, the right thing to do is to spread it around to anybody who needs it, or anybody who even wants it, or anybody who just wants to learn from it. So the challenge is, how do we pay those people who are creative? How do we encourage them to create? Well, in some sense, you can't stop those people from creating, right? Being an artist is not the most financially rewarding profession, but somehow we have a lot of them. People who do it for the love of it. The same is true of writing. Those of us who went into software got lucky, at least temporarily, and people actually will pay us for what we do. But a lot of other creators just do it out of love and they scrape by. But still, I think we need to find social mechanisms to encourage creation and tie that in to understanding that to restrict and copying produces a social evil, not a social good. Now, I had a vague understanding of this 10 or 15 years ago because I had been working with free software, and I understood what kind of power it gives to write something and give it away. How much you can change the world for how little input of time and ingenuity and energy. And along with a couple other people, I started a company called Cygnus Solutions, which maintained the GNU C compiler, C++ compiler, debugger, assembler, and all of those tools for many years, and still does. And one of the primary rules in that company was our tools are free software, our products are free software. We won't restrict anybody from trying to duplicate these. What we're going to charge people for is the work that we put into them. And we found people who were willing to pay us to work on those tools. People who we could create value for. For example, Intel, besides having the whole 386 line, also had a couple of other lines of chips. Nowadays they have the Acorn MIST machines, etc. In those days they had the 860 and 960 embedded system chips. And they paid us to make the GNU tools work with their chip. Well, it was actually a benefit to them, once we had done the work, that they could hand out those tools to anybody who wanted them, because then those people would consider buying their chip. And it was worth it to them to pay us. Well, What we learned pretty quickly, though, was that we had to, we couldn't do the work in advance and then expect to be paid for it. Because people would just take the software and go, ha, see you later. We made that mistake once or twice. But we learned. And there are lots of other artists that do the same thing, right? A provocative example is prostitutes. They learn very quickly to charge the customer before they provide the service. The same is true of musicians who give concerts, of anyone who puts on a theater production, who puts on a sporting event. The consumer pays first and then they get the experience. And that's the sort of business models I think we need to look at for software, for authorship, for movies, etc., where the consumer or whoever is being benefited, where you buy a subscription from someone you trust and they deliver you a result that's worth something to you. And that result, it was worth it to you to pay to have that result created, but you're not paying to have it exclusively created for you. You're paying so that you have access to it. And if anybody else wants access, they can get it too. I think if we don't create good business models like this, well, Cygnus is a successful company. When I left it in 1996, we had about 70 employees, and when we sold it to Red Hat, we had about 120 or 130. And I think it still provides the bulk of Red Hat's revenues and has even taught Red Hat how to become profitable. That business model is a success, but very few other companies are willing to follow those sort of models. They think of their software as the family jewels. They think that giving that away would destroy all the value they create, and it's not true. But they're afraid to trust that they can keep creating value for their customers, that their customers will keep paying them to keep working on it. Right? What they want is to lock the customer in somehow and make it so that they have to pay over and over and over whether they like the results or not. If we can convince enough people to start businesses like this, then by the time physical objects are copyable, by the time we face this problem throughout the entire economy instead of just throughout the intellectual property economy, there will be business models that people can understand, can be taught in business schools and learn just by watching other companies, that will let them stay in business, feed their families, make profit, and continue to create new things. If we continue on this theory, on these business models that require investment up front that is then paid back by restricting copying, then what we're going to see is an underground of copying technology that's being opposed by laws and companies that have a vested interest in preventing it. And my guess is that the underground will win because it will have better tools. It's just a whole lot easier if you're fighting a war to be able to replicate your weapons and defenses than it is to have to build them by hand. But I don't want there to have to be a world war to settle this. I don't want there to have to be major economic dislocations when this happens. And I have a serious vested interest in this. I'm going to live through these times. And I don't want to live through those times if it's going to be violent and terrible. I'm trying to get people to understand far enough in advance that we have enough time to make a shift in how we understand the economics so that we can all peacefully move into a world where there's plenty for everybody and plenty of opportunity to create new things. And now I'll take a few questions.
On the players who actually have an advantage from the development of new chips, in the chip developer being the obvious one. I think there is a subform of the tragedy of the commons in this approach. In basically, if you have a generic piece of software that everyone will wait for someone else to pay for the development in order to reap the reward without paying for it, and thus it won't get done.
Well, if that was true of everyone, then indeed it wouldn't get done. But then eventually, after it didn't get done, somebody would get fed up with waiting and would put in some of the resources to create it. I mean, it is possible for people to act against their own self-interest in the long term, as long as they want. But eventually people who are smarter about their own self-interest will say, of course it's worth $1 to me to contribute to this effort. I'll throw the $1 in.
Yeah. So the practical problem that I see is actually that people will wait out each other, and sooner or later someone has the itch to scratch that is worth it. But by then maybe a year has passed, and the software could already be in heavy development, but everyone waited for someone else to start it.
Well, one of the interesting things about a society where it's sufficiently cheap to duplicate shelter and clothing and food and basic necessities of life is that people have lots of free time to create things, and people may create these things the same way things are created in an academic environment where your facilities are paid for, and what you have to do is, what are you going to do that's interesting with your time? Yes?
I think if you talk about public protection, you talk about value of information. And a lot of companies are selling information which, in my eyes, is worth nothing. And that's why they fear so much the raising the cost of it. Because if you buy a steel fitting shares, you give it to it 100 times, you don't know it's worth nothing. But on the other hand, information is worth something. And the work and the people of data will follow. A lot of information is really worth protecting. So, if you against protection of protection, how do you protect the information that is worth protecting?
You're talking about protecting information like private information, things like that.
Yes.
Well, sort of copy protection, I mean, if you take a look at history, Xerox machines have made it much harder to keep secrets. Because any employee of your company who has access to an incriminating memo or something, if they don't like it, they can Xerox it and then pass it on to the police, the competitors, or whatever. Right? That's a case where copying technology has actually made it harder to keep things secret. But it still requires that someone have access to the original secret. That basically they violate the secrecy of it. The kinds of copy protection that we're dealing with here are copy protection for things that are broadly spread throughout society. For a CD that you can go down and buy, right, or a piece of software that you can order across the net. Those things aren't secret, and there's no issue about keeping them private. In the back.
My favorite band, which has already put out 11 albums, finally got pissed off with their distributor and their producers, and they financed the last album by pre-selling 12,500 copies of the album before they even went into the studio. These are the same people who don't have a problem with me wandering into a gig with a laptop and a camera and waving a zoom lens around the venue.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Hire them as CEOs of your new business.
Name the band so we can give them more business.
Yeah, just to as a sense of reward to them, the band is brilliant. They've been around for a while, and a lot of people think they're dead, but they've put out 8 albums since they changed lead singer.
Actually, the other common example of a band that's done that is the Grateful Dead. It turns out almost by accident, stumbled into a policy of selling special tickets at their concerts to people who wanted to tape the concerts. And the reason is that people would come and tape it, and they thought that was more or less okay, as long as they weren't taping it and selling the tapes commercially. But there was this big annoyance between the fans who wanted to scream and shout and dance and all that, and the ones who wanted to put up these expensive microphones and record exactly the sound of the band and not the comments of the guy sitting next to them. So they sold tickets in a special section that was right behind the soundboard and got the best mix of sound. But the deal was you had to sit down and shut up if you were in that section. And then you could make tapes and trade them around freely. The result, this was partly the proclivities of the band, that they liked touring, they liked improvising. They never go on stage with a set list in mind, and when they play 3 shows for a weekend, every show is different. And just every show is unique. It's not that they vary a couple of the tunes. What they love is the creativity that comes from interacting with each other in surprising ways. And their fans loved this too, and they wanted to record that and spread it around. The result was these tapes all circulated among music fans. Many people heard them who had never ever gone to a Dead concert, and they kind of got sucked into the scene and wanted to go, experience this live and see what this whole phenomenon is about. They actually produced probably 8 or 10 different records with various record companies. And it took till they were 15 years old, till the band had been in existence 15 years before they ever got a gold record out of it. They were fundamentally not a commercial success at selling records, but they were a commercial success at selling concerts. And allowing their fans to copy their music around made the concert business that much more successful. In the year before Jerry Garcia died, they were the top grossing concert band in the world and brought in more than $60 million in concerts. Yes?
Just to skip back a bit, I think it's really interesting seeing your sort of utopian vision of a society where there's no one for anything, we can copy real goods as well as information goods, and people can contribute to these intellectual works that are very interesting. But I think there's also an illustrative problem in the talk. If you skip back to Tom's comment at the beginning, he was saying, well, there's going to be a delay, there won't be enough incentive for people to write free software soon enough. And your example of Cygnus developing a compiler for an Intel embedded machine because Intel was willing to pay you sort of highlights that the fact that the kinds of things that you develop are dictated by what someone like Intel is willing to pay you right then. It might not have been the best development for GCC that was possible, but that was the one to do. And then you come to a situation where companies like Cygnus and Red Hat are profitable, but they aren't actually really making enough money to transform the entire economy. Cygnus and Red Hat can't make the kind of money that Microsoft, even $1,000.
Oh, that's true, but we can transform the economy anyway. Because our stuff spreads without ever having to pay us.
And do we really want to become Microsoft?
Well, no, I'm just saying, it's an interesting question about how we're going to evolve from the existing market economy to the kind of utopian economy that you're having a very affordable vision. I think you would probably agree
He says, without greed, the system will not work.
Yeah, there used to be, there used to be 2 words in the English language, greed and avarice, and they meant slightly different things. And through a process of linguistic politics, we've lost the difference between them. And I try to reproduce this difference when I give my version of this talk. And that is that one of the words meant, I want your woman, and I want your chair. All right? I want to take, because I only see a limited, so I'm going to take it. All right? And The other was I want lots of cool things. I want neat chairs and fun people, and let's make more. Okay? And there was a difference between greed and avarice. And in actuality, we lost the word for the nastier one, so that the two were kind of combined and softened. Right? But it's good to bring that distinction back. Right? There's a type of greed which is a creative greed, and there's a type of greed which is a destructive greed.
Right. I have a greed for more civil rights.
Sorry?
Oh, hang on. You've been waiting for a while.
Yes, you were really interesting part about new economic model.
Speak up a little.
You talked about building new economic model, and what I want to say, what prevents me from buying lots of software or buying lots of CD is the price. So if you were able to sell software here and price for a lot more, I would buy a lot more.
You can turn that down.
Right.
But I was saying that if we were able to make low-cost CDs or software, I would buy a lot more.
Right. Well, and actually one of the things that goes to the point from over here about how do we make a transition from the older model to a new one. In the case of music, the middlemen take such a huge fraction of the money for doing the distribution that if the band could sell you their music over the net for $1, they'd make more money than selling it to you in a record store for $16. Right? Because they're only getting like 50 cents when you buy it for $16. All the rest of that money is going to the retailer, to the wholesaler, to the jobber, to the distributor, to the publisher, to the music publisher. All of those people are raking in fractions of it. And if you actually want to understand the economics of the music business, there's a really good book called This Business of Music that is designed for artists actually to read before they sign a record contract. And it shows sample record contracts and what the provisions in them actually mean, and it does the math for you. It shows you actually how little money you're really going to make. There's also another great article by Courtney Love, I think it was published in Salon magazine about a year ago. Yeah, that talked about what tiny fraction of the money the artists actually get. Worth understanding when you see this is why the record companies are so ferocious about trying to suppress all those startup companies that were trying to bring music out across the internet. Because the artists, if they actually understood what's best in it for them, the artists would all be working at those startups, making music and feeding them to the public through the startups. And they would be dropping the record companies, which are stealing 95% of the money. But the contracts are such that those guys are locked into those record companies for their next 18 albums. Yes?
This way, I mean, you have a lot of money, when they pay people who drive trucks, and they pay people build CDs and all that. And
Right. Absolutely. Well, the money, yes, the money certainly circulates around the economy, but it's for make work. It's like paying people to shovel coal on electric trains, right? I mean, in some parts of the United States, they still have to do that. They have coal shovelers required by union rules who have to be on every train, even though there's no coal in the train anymore. And the same is true. The music can come straight from the artist's website to you over a net connection that costs you $20 a month that you're paying for anyway because of all the other things you can do with it. You don't have to drive a truck and press a CD to get the music to you.
That's great. Everywhere you go, of course.
Yeah, but our job is not to create jobs for people, actually. The ideal world would be one where nobody had to work and we'd all just have fun. And that they're driving a truck because they like driving a truck.
Don't expect this world to become tomorrow.
What?
No, it's probably going to be about 15 to 25 years.
Others always want to misuse it, and that's why it won't have to work when you have to brainwash people.
Well, I don't think we'll have to brainwash people in order to move to it. I mean, what it will take to start this revolution is to create that technology. We've already come a very long way towards doing it, and there are vast incentives to continue. The guy who actually coined the term for this technology, which is called nanotechnology, was Eric Drexler. He worked at MIT, and his real concern with this was that the military would grab onto this technology and use it to build miniaturized sensors and smart bombs and use it to get military advantages, and they classify the whole thing the way they did with nuclear technology, and that none of the peaceful uses that would ever get out. So we have successfully so far avoided that. It's clear, in the US and Japan and also in Europe, governments are spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year pushing forward the research for this, as well as in private institutions. It's clearly going to happen. The question is, how do we greet it? Do we greet it with crabby hearts by saying, they're stealing something from me, or do we greet it with open arms by saying, look at all the things I can get out of this, look at all the things everyone can get out of this? Yes?
What you seem to be advocating is not that the technology will bring about the revolution, which it basically is, but that we need to bring about the revolution for the technology will come.
We need to understand the implications of the technology so the revolution can be peaceful instead of violent. So that the revolution can happen without throwing scientists into prison. So that the revolution can happen without outlawing publication of things that are common public knowledge. So that we continue to have civil rights while we're going through this transition, rather than being in a state of combat, in a state of war. Yes?
Yes, I'd just like to address your concern of the starving lorry driver who won't see children anymore because he doesn't drive any skis around the countryside. It's just basically another way of the record company saying, we're going to die if video recorders will be out. Just a different way of stating the same. I don't think any lorry driver will starve. He might not be a lorry driver anymore. You know, just to kind of put it into perspective.
Of course, but the money was still there. We'll do something else. But
The money will be there, but it'll be there in the pocket of the person who bought the music for $1 instead of for $16, and they will spend it on what they want.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's in the pocket of this person or the other.
There will always be some pain in transition. So there will always be pain areas.
One of the problems.
Say here. I'm the speaker here.
Yeah. Kill this point dead. Get to it, John.
I don't think it needs killing. I think the audience is with me on this. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Somebody up there.
You were comparing the copying of things and the copying of software. What about the copying of human beings, for example? Is it just the copying of information, or what would you say on this?
Well, I'm not qualified to state an opinion on that. That's another one for the philosophers and the biologists. Is there a difference between living things and copies of living things that have performed the same functions? We may only find out by trying to make those copies and seeing if there's an essential difference. Right? And what's wrong with that? We have great technology now for making more humans. Yes.
Well, the way I understand your new economy is that you transfer the role of consumer to the role of investor, which I think would seem to work in the case of Marais, because their product tends to be everyone knows it's a good band, and people who like that band willing to put down money to invest in the possibility of a new Marais city. Even though that's taking a risk, because maybe the next city is going to suck real bad, I'm going to hate music, but I put down the money anyway.
Right.
Same for your company, because you have proven your value by producing take a choice to invest in something they had no sense of?
It's a great question, and I can only answer it by analogy to how does society decide how and how much to invest in children, right? When we bring up a child, these are unformed human beings, unformed adults. Some of them will do wonderful things for the world. Some of them will be bums all their lives. It's no way to tell who is going to do what. But somehow what we do is we give all of them some benefit of the doubt. We invest money in schools. We spend years of our lives teaching them and training them how to be. And there's enough of a surplus of money in our adult lives that we can give it to our children. There's enough of a surplus in our educational systems that we can give the money to educate the youth. And I see the same sort of thing happening, that there's enough surplus to support new people, new bands, new writers, whatever, until they become known, the same way we support a graduate student before they finish their thesis.
Then instead of investing in Berlin University, I would invest money in a blank fund which would support new artists.
Maybe. I mean, I invest in charities that give out money. The Usenix Association, which I'm on the board of, and which puts money into having this conference happen, gives out hundreds of thousands of dollars to students every year. But they make money on conferences and then give it out to students to encourage them to work in computer science. So, yeah, I mean, at least in the United States, charity is a huge sector. And churches actually do most of it, and churches do a lot of the education as well, both moral education as well as the secular education. There are many people with extra resources around that are willing to donate to make the world a little bit better. And maybe the same way that as you stroll past a musician on the street, if you like what they're playing, you toss in a guilder. Well, it would make for one of a large number of interesting problems that would have to get solved. Yes. Well, David Chong had an answer for that, which is numbers that are money, but his company did not succeed. I don't know how to solve that problem, but that's a great problem, right? The governments of the world have that problem today. They have to continue evolving the money as the copying technology improves. Well, maybe the solution will come in having things that can only be spent once. That when you spend it, it checks it against the database and says, coin number has been spent already. You must have cloned that. Up here.
In the new society, the Star Trek loving society where everybody has everything you generate you need. You could read whatever, you solve this and you want this. How to generate the need for something you didn't even know. At the moment, like you've been advertising some new movie. I was see this movie, you go to the cinema and say, oh, it was a great movie, you paid a lot of money, but I could have saved money if I would be in a different society. How would you generate this new need for new things, which is invented, or basically, even a simple example, how can somebody produce a movie which is as good as the movies you see now, but sort of modern?
Well, there are several answers to that. One of them is the cost of making those movies will go down dramatically. It's already going down because, digital cameras and computerized editing technology makes it much easier, the same way that desktop publishing made it much easier to make your own magazines and books. But the second piece of that is the first movies out of new filmmakers are not going to be all that ambitious. And George Lucas's first movie, I think, was THX 1138. not really a very good movie. But he got some art reputation out of it and worked his way up. And eventually, he came to a point where people were willing to put money down to say, I'll put the money in because I know he's going to make something I like at the end.
You mentioned the next generation of storage technology with devils in it that checks what the content is, and that was part of the reaction to the CFS announcement. What do you see happening as that stuff hits the market in the next few Christmases? You know, is the consumer going to accept it, be smart enough to look for particular insignia and selectively get manufacturers to keep the old hard drives in production? The way they didn't with the Pentium thing.
Well, it remains to be seen. I mean, the question is, will consumers be smart enough to avoid the hidden technology built into their motherboards, their disk drives, their monitors, etc., that's all designed to work against their own interests? This is still very much up in the air, which is why I'm out here talking about it and we're working on the issue, is to educate people to actually think about those choices and educate the companies involved to say, you know, we're going to have enough educated consumers out there that they're not going to buy your product if you put this in. Right? I sent mail off to people I know at Intel today saying, by the way, your HDCP copy protection has been broken, and maybe you should reconsider putting it in your products.